Welcome to Moving Forward, conversations on culture, identity, healing, and hope. I'm your host, Linda Anderson, and I created this podcast as a space for real, heartfelt conversations with people who are reflecting, evolving, and boldly stepping into what's next. This podcast was born out of my own journey through seasons of loss, transition, and transformation, and my belief that healing happens when we come together to share our stories. My hope is that these conversations will inspire you to pause, reflect, and find courage as you move forward in your own life. Today's guest is Nate Ivey. He reminds us that real leadership is about systems thinking, connecting people, purpose, and the planet. Nate began his journey as a history teacher, helping students see their place in the larger human story and the power of civic engagement. Over time, that work evolved into leadership that now bridges classrooms, communities, and businesses, helping organizations understand that sustainability isn't just an environmental goal, it's a leadership mindset. As an instructional coach and leader of Fremont's Clean Initiative, Nate supports environmental literacy and climate action throughout the district. He's also the district's representative on the City of Fremont's Environmental Sustainability Commission and serves as co-chair of CAELI, and he'll correct me later if I said that wrong, which is the California Environmental Literacy Initiative. From his early partnership with Alameda County Stop Waste and service learning projects that empowered students to take action, Nate continues to show that when schools and businesses work together, they can strengthen both community well-being and environmental health. Nate, I cannot thank you enough for coming on this podcast with me. And for the listeners, Nate and I have worked together. And one of the things I'll always remember with Nate is working on service learning projects and also the environment. So again, Nate, thank you for being here today.
Great. Linda, thanks so much for having me. I really look forward to the conversation.
So Nate, you did start as a history teacher, and that's actually where I met you first. So being a history teacher, how did understanding human stories and systems prepare you to think about environmental leadership in a broader community-centered way?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Before I was a history teacher, I actually did a lot of environmental work. So I worked as a guide for a cross-country bike tour. I worked as a sea kayak tour guide in Baja, Mexico. I worked at a outdoor school. I worked in an after-school program, and a lot of those had outdoor components. So I think I probably already brought a disposition and a background to this, like a lot of people do. A lot of people have experiences when they're younger, being outdoors and connecting to nature. But specifically related to history, I taught American Studies, which is a combination of US history and American lit. So we would, read major novels from the American canon and kind of think about the history that was going along at those times. So there's a number of themes that come up and intersect. One is the transcendentalist movement, kind of the uniquely American genre of poetry and writing that really connects an interrogation of nature with trying to understand the human condition. We read The Grapes of Wrath and Their Eyes Were Watching God, both, novels that are set against big environmental and social justice stories. So, I think there's quite a bit there to help make sense of the place we're in, the resources we have access to, and just our journey through life. One other thing I would say I think is important from the history perspective is, I think people hear environment and a lot of people automatically categorize environmental issues as science topics. And science can certainly help us understand the environment and environmental issues. But the place where decisions gets made is in social studies. It's where our politics are. It's where our economic systems lie. It's where we understand psychology and decision making, how we form relationships and agreements. So, if we're really going to dig into and be able to make an environmental difference and enact environmental leadership, we really do have to lean into all disciplines, but particularly social studies.
I want to go back to the very beginning when we were starting the conversation where you gave more background about yourself. And that is definitely what this podcast is about, is how you did move forward. And I appreciate that you brought in that decisions get made in social studies. So I really want listeners to understand and hear as you're talking how you do move forward and how you move forward with the knowledge that you had from each segment of your journey in life. So back to that though, when we talk about culture, how can both the schools and businesses nurture cultures that value sustainability and responsibility?
Yeah, there's a lot in that question, and I think it really comes down to the idea of values and really thinking about what's important to you as an individual and what's important to you as an organization. I think schools and businesses need to have conversations about values and see where there's common ground about how we care for each other, how we care for our place, whether it's a school or a workplace. And then ultimately, how that care extends to sustainability, responsibility, and the planet. Um, I think it's probably equal parts relationship building among the people in those organizations, and process building, kind of taking a look at the ways operations happen, business happens, and seeing if those align with the values about care and responsibility and stewardship.
Mhm. I appreciate what you said about conversations because that is so critical for anybody to, be able to bring forward to whoever you're working with, whatever topic you're working on, to have that conversation. That being said, what lessons though about empathy, identity, do you think business leaders, classrooms, or business leaders could actually learn from the classroom, especially when building teams or leading through change?
One thing we talk a lot about in education is growth mindset, that we're all kind of emerging, right? So you're in class and you're in school for a reason. It's because you don't know things yet. So having a growth mindset that I don't know it yet doesn't mean I'll never know it or never learn it or never be able to do it. It just means like at this moment in time, I can't do it yet. Um, it's also, I think we talk a lot about no matter where you are, it's okay to be there, but it might not be okay to stay there. So if you're in a place where you need to grow or move forward, you don't want to get stuck, and you might need to think about how you can, again, move forward and take on more responsibility or change. Um, I think another thing that I learned in the classroom, we often assign students group work and group projects. And I think, there are teachers and maybe businesses that just put people in teams and expect them to automatically and magically know how to behave in a team.
Mhm.
So in my class, we would invest a lot of time in team skills and explicitly teach the different roles that a person might play in a team. And we would work with students to have them build team resumes. So what are the things that I'm good at? What are the skills that I bring to this challenge or this problem? What are the complementary skills that are in this group? And how might we divide up the work to take advantage of the different skill sets that are in this group? And I think, I imagine that, a lot of businesses also just kind of assign people to work in teams. But I wonder to what extent are they deliberate about building support or teaching skills that they want students to have? And just, kind of interestingly, like another experience I had early in my career as a young teacher getting my credential in New Mexico was I did a summer internship with Intel Corporation. And they, explicitly taught these team building skills. And we spent, a full week in orientation learning these skills and these values and these processes. for an internship that was only 8 weeks long. So, 1/8 of the entire experience was training for this work. So anyway, I think it's important to support people. This question also asks about empathy, and I think people tend to imagine that others see the world the same way they do. Um, and it's important to kind of ask and explore that. We had a training tool in service learning where we ask people to kind of rank order a list of words to how closely they align with their personal definition of service. And there's terms like giving blood, volunteering for the military, making a donation, adopting a child. And I think, when we rank order those personally, we assume, oh, everybody else probably rank ordered these the same way. But when we look at it, people bring a lot of different values that maybe service needs to be a sacrifice, or service is something that I know I can do, or maybe a high definition of service for other people is like something that I can't do, but I'm really thankful that someone else can do. So when we explore those meanings, it helps us kind of develop empathy and understanding for where people are coming from. And again, it goes to those relationships, it goes to those conversations, so that we can really listen and understand people.
Mhm. I want to go back to when you talked about growth mindset and the power of yet, and not being afraid to, when you take on a project or whatever it may be, whether it's in the classroom, business, not be afraid that it's going to fall apart maybe, but then who is in the room? So the identity of who's there and who can fill in on those particular teams of whatever it is that is trying to be accomplished. So I appreciate you bringing that growth mindset up, because there's so much work out there on that. So Nate, you did work closely with Alameda County Stop Waste and to bring real world service into the classroom. And I was a recipient of that. So how can partnerships like that model the kind of collaboration we need between education, government, and business?
Um, yeah, so again, not only did I work with Stop Waste, I was for a short time, I was a board member on the Waste Reduction and Recycling Board. And one of the things that we talked a lot about there is that, Stop Waste has goals to reduce waste, improve recycling, extend the life of landfills, improve environmental sustainability in our communities. And Alameda County is so varied and diverse across languages, ages, neighborhood cultures, living contexts, that it's really difficult and impossible for an agency like Stop Waste to make a one size fits all model that works for all community members. So like we would hear things like the 4 Rs, reduce, reuse, recycle, rot was, something that Stop Waste was really trying to promote. Um, and from a board perspective, as we're trying to think of all of the roles of the agency, not only working with schools, but businesses, households, cities. Um, it became clear that Stop Waste didn't have all of the skills, tools, and relationships it needed to meet the needs of all these various communities. In fact, one institution in our communities seemed to be most representative of the communities they serve, and those were schools. So schools are a place where, students from all backgrounds, all living situations, all language groups come together. So in this partnership with Stop Waste, schools needed services in order to move forward. Stop Waste could provide technical assistance, they could provide funding, they could provide resources like bins and signage to help improve recycling systems. But schools could provide this kind of social understanding and social networks to get access into communities where Stop Waste might often have a hard time reaching. So I think these kinds of collaborations really point to when there are mutual goals, but different skill sets and resources that need to come together to achieve those goals. Um, so, another thing that Stop Waste has been talking about lately that I really like is they've been really leaning into this idea of a spectrum of community engagement, and it comes from an organization called Movement Generation. Um, and the idea behind the spectrum of community engagement is kind of mapping out the different ways that institutions might partner with each other, or provide service to different communities. And often one of the first places on this spectrum is ignoring. So, like an institution or a business or a government agency might come out and, say, we think the best way forward is this without receiving any feedback, input, um, or ideas from the communities they're serving. So they're kind of ignoring what the community might actually need and kind of saying, hey, this is what we think you need. The spectrum kind of then moves into informing, like agencies or institutions often have expertise that they can share, in kind of a telling or sharing direct information. It might move into then consulting, where a service recipient knows they need help with something and they have an idea of how to do it, but they need a consultant to kind of inform them and point out the journey. Anyway, this spectrum moves into a place where agencies are learning from each other, they're collaborating, and maybe eventually the larger agencies are deferring to the community because the community has developed the power and the tools to lead. And so the larger agencies, businesses, or institutions would defer to those communities and maybe collect and share those best practices to inspire others around an issue or a topic.
So I'm going to go back and to talk about stop waste a little bit more. That is something that it's not a one-time event. It's been going on, like you said, they're down changing this and that. So from your experience, and you're an extremely authentic person, what does make a partnership authentic? Why is, I'm using stop waste, but there's many that you're involved in, that it's not just one time, it keeps going, because this does benefit both students and organizations. So again, what makes a partnership authentic?
Yeah, again, I think it goes back to an alignment of values and an alignment of goals. So, when different organizations or individuals care about the same thing or can find common ground about things they care about, even if there are things they have different opinions on or different responsibilities for, if there's a shared ground of common values, and a shared ground of goals, I think that's pretty essential to a foundation of a long-term partnership. Then again, the other part of it becomes the relationship, so the ongoing communication, the regular interactions, and then also the processes and the ways to kind of institutionalize some of those relationships. So in Stop Waste's case, one of the things that Fremont did in, I think, 2012, this is after years of working with Stop Waste already, but the school board passed a resolution to be a priority partnership district with Stop Waste. So on the district side, we agreed to take certain commitments to reducing waste. And on Stop Waste side, they agreed to make certain commitments to providing service for us, whether it was access to field trips, access to technical expertise, programming for students, whatever the case would be. It was like taking that relationship to the next step and to the next
Yeah.
level and putting some solid kind of procedures and basically putting it in writing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another organization I think about in this space, beyond Stop Waste, in the context of Fremont, is a local nonprofit organization, the Math Science Nucleus. When I first started teaching in the district, they provided a tour of the entire city and, kind of helped us get familiar with the different schools, but it was really helping us get familiar with the local environment in Fremont. And this was nearly 30 years ago. I think Fremont already had been working with Math Science Nucleus for a number of years. And here it is 30, almost 30 years later in my career, and I'm still working with
Okay.
Math Science Nucleus from that first day I met them on the bus at my first orientation in the district. Um, so, you know, the other thing about these is that they grow and change over time. So as needs change, as long as values and goals still align, you can do bigger and better things together, which I think also helps keep these relationships and partnerships fresh.
Which is where the next part of this conversation is going to go, focusing on you too, though. Bigger, you said bigger and better things. And people that know you or myself is your journey has been bigger and better things. So it goes into the work you're doing. And please correct me if I say the one wrong. Your work that you're doing with Clean, and then is it Kaylee? How do you say that?
Callie.
Highly. So it's required, you do a lot of uniting with very different stakeholders such as businesses, teachers, city officials, community advocates. So with that, what leadership strategies though help keep everyone focused on a shared purpose rather than competing priorities?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two big strategies, and I think we've kind of
Touched
touched
on.
on these, but they keep coming up. The idea of relationships, right? So like
Mhm.
understanding each other, knowing people on a personal level, and then also having processes and procedures. Linda, our friend Evan Goldberg, he had an exercise where he asked people to think about, are you a process person or a relationship person, right? Like when you're in a meeting, do you depend on kind of that social time and you know and trust people, and so it's relationship based, or are you a process person? Like I need an agenda, I need the time, I need to know the goals, I need it to be organized. Nobody is an extreme one or the other. We're all some combination. And for me, like I've largely been a process person. Like I get antsy when there's not an agenda or when the goals aren't clear. Or I feel like we're wasting time with, breaker or team builders or icebreakers. But over time, I've really come to understand and better appreciate the point of view of the folks who really emphasize relationships. And, I think to be an effective leader, you need to be really mindful of the needs of people on both sides of that spectrum and ensure that the way you're facilitating and leading is mindful of, you know, clear procedures, goals, timelines, agendas, while also letting people be human and making relationships and getting to know each other and building trust. Um, so I think those are essential just generally in leadership. Yeah, and I'd be happy to talk more about like Clean and Cali and some of the examples from those organizations.
And could you do that for us? Because so I also get a little bit more of, I know Clean because I've been with you on that journey, but Callie is the one that if actually both, if the listeners can understand how you
Sure.
go ahead.
So Clean is Fremont's climate literacy and environmental action network. And we formed Clean coming out of the pandemic. A group of students organized and passed a school board resolution calling for an educational response to the climate emergency and demanding high quality, action oriented climate learning in their TK through 12 experience. So when that resolution passed, I raised my hand and said, "Yes, I want to work on this." And to move a resolution from a declaration into action, you have to do a lot of work. So I think there's a misunderstanding about how resolutions work. A resolution gets passed. Oh, great, climate literacy done. And no, it's now just permission to do the actual hard work of developing the entire program. So. For Clean, we assembled a committee of teachers, making sure that we had representation from elementary, middle, and high school, and all the different attendance areas and neighborhoods in Fremont. That we had student leadership because they were the drivers of this initiative, and they're actually the ones whose lived experience will best inform the approaches we take. And then we also engaged our community partners. So Stop Waste, Mass Science Nucleus, the city of Fremont. We had to do some work to like kind of understand and look at what the resolution said. We had to do some research to find out what's already happening with climate literacy. But then again, we had to have conversations about our values, our vision, and how we were going to move this forward. So that's a little bit about Clean and some of the diverse partnerships there. CALI, the California Environmental Literacy Initiative, is a project of 10 Strands, which is a nonprofit organization here in California. Um, And the purpose of CAELI is kind of a second iteration of a group that started off as, oh gosh, was it the Environmental Literacy Steering Committee? California passed a blueprint for environmental literacy. So again, a plan was passed. I helped work on the blueprint for environmental literacy for California. And there's a real danger that when a blueprint or a plan gets passed, especially by an organization like California Department of Education, that blueprint gets put on a shelf and, oh, we have a blueprint. So it's how do you take that document, that vision, and put it into action? So the Environmental Literacy Steering Committee and then CALI, the California Environmental Literacy Initiative, were formed basically with the purpose of enacting the blueprint and achieving the goals of environmental literacy for all of California's, 5 million students. In order to do that, Cali has a number of projects and organizations working with county offices of education, school districts from around the state, community-based partners, um, students. There's a whole bunch of stakeholders who are engaged in this. So, it's a challenge to think about how do you move 1,000 school districts forward, 10,000 schools or more, to ensure that every kid in every classroom has this opportunity. So the systemic thinking and systemic change is really a challenge, especially in a place as diverse as California. So you got to think about representation. You got to think about programs that can serve the unique needs of different communities, again, while keeping your values and your goal in mind and sharing common values and common goals.
As I'm listening to you, I'm going back to the title of this podcast, moving forward, and again back to your journey and how much movement has been made from growth mindset. You weren't there yet. Student voice. I so appreciate that was brought in. Declaration into action. So, with that being said, the Golden Bell Award recognized Fremont Unified for climate innovation. First, can you tell us a little bit more about the Golden Bell Award, but also how can the private sector take inspiration from how schools achieve that, particularly in using small, consistent actions to make a big change?
Yeah, so the Golden Bell is a recognition program from the California School Boards Association. Each school district has a school board. There's a professional organization called CSBA, and they provide a lot of support to board members and school boards around the state. And one of those programs is a recognition. So they have a wide range of golden bells that are provided. There are some for social emotional leadership, academic achievement, and this one happened to be for climate change innovation. Um, I think in our case, it's kind of a funny story of how we ended up applying for this. 3 or 4 years ago, it was becoming, more and more clear to me that um, in our school district, we needed to move our environmental efforts forward with communication between our instructional services folks. Those are the ones who, provide services to students and, teach and do all the other kind of supports, and our business services division, which, runs school buses and organizes meals and takes care of our buildings. Um, so we formed a little bit of an ad hoc green team with the goal of providing a report to the school board every year on or about Earth Day. And again, this was kind of in response to that resolution that students passed, but students had also passed two other resolutions. They passed a resolution prior to the educational response to climate emergency. They passed a resolution calling for a commitment to climate change action, kind of recognizing that our school district and school districts in general are, they have a big environmental footprint in their communities. School districts in many places are the largest landowner, building manager, food service provider, transportation provider, employer, and they have a big impact. So students passed a resolution calling for us to minimize our footprint and our environmental impact. Middle school students in our district organized and passed a resolution trying to commit us to become a zero waste to landfill entity. So what would it look like if we were able to design waste out of our systems and we never threw anything away that ended up in a landfill? So that's led to programs like a reusable lunch program in 10 of our elementary schools on stainless steel serviceware. Anyway, a number of these resolutions had passed, and we thought it'd be a good idea to provide updates to the board about how we were doing on these resolutions. Um, so we'd done that for a couple of years, and then 2 years ago, the board president goes, we should apply for one of those, what are they called? We had to all search for the name. We should apply for one of those golden bells. So then Corey and I, kind of frantically and quickly wrote the application. But I think what we can learn from this and what we can learn from recognition programs is I think recognition helps reinforce the identity that you want people to have about themselves. It helps to celebrate the hard work that they've done, and to value it and to notice it. And I think whether it's Golden Bell or even, storytelling, helping to capture the stories and celebrate them helps remind us of who we are. And the organizations that are providing that recognition helps to reinforce some of the values they hope to see out in the world. So, maybe on the question of what can the private sector take from this is, think about the recognition systems that are out there and how they can be leveraged to help reinforce the ideas and values that you want people to have about themselves or that you want your organization to see itself in. And I think in Fremont, we're turning a corner. There have always been pockets of excellence
Mhm.
related to environmental efforts and programs in the district. But I don't think it's something that the community broadly thought about or would come top of mind when you think about the school district. Oh, they're great on the environment, even though in many cases we were. I think that story is starting to shift, and I think people are really starting to recognize the ways that Fremont Unified School District is an environmental leader. Because we're doing the work, we're telling the story, we're celebrating the successes, and we're moving forward.
So, with that being said, you feel that the businesses are listening, they're watching, they're seeing what changes they could possibly make. Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think for me, the idea is that recognition helps reinforce
Okay.
a value or a point of view. So, if you're in the private sector and you're trying to think about how you solidify or crystallize your culture, what are the things that you want to be known for? How do you celebrate those and how can you be recognized for them? So in our case, something we wanted to crystallize and have a shared understanding of our belief in it was our climate and environmental leadership. So we've been doing the work, but the recognition really helps crystallize it and helps to communicate that value to a broader audience.
Mhm. So I want to pull that out for the listeners, and that is recognition. Very, very, very important. We do it in the classroom. You should be doing it in the business. And again, I think it's that leads to that sustainability, which many of these organizations that you're involved in, you're seeing the sustainability, and that goes with the recognition with whoever's working on the project. So thank you for that. So Nate, I just really have one more question. Looking 5 years from now, how do you envision Fremont Unified, and the city and the businesses within the city? How do you envision that moving forward together toward a healthier, more sustainable future? But before I end that question, I want all listeners to even think about your own school district in your own city, your own town. How can the businesses within move forward together toward a healthier, more sustainable future?
Yeah, so thinking of the work on the Sustainability Commission, Fremont has already done a tremendous amount of work in this, and is in many ways is a leader among its city peers, and has been recognized, for its climate action plan, its transportation mobility plan. Like all communities, it has a lot of work to do on, things like trees and parks and other kind of livability indexes, but having a vision and a plan for achieving those is really important. Fremont, and I don't know if this is unique to Fremont or if it's shared across many communities, but Fremont's history is really interesting. It was five different cities that have come together to be one city. And I think Fremont, in many ways, has always kind of struggled with being a place. There's been, a lot of change in our community, a lot of growth. And a lot of newcomers to Fremont. So it's, how do you take this change? How do you take this origin story of five different communities becoming one, and all of these people from around the world, kind of finding their way in this community to make it feel like a place. So like I think in 5 years, what I would love to see is, just a much stronger sense of place and belonging and civic pride and shared sense of accomplishment with the work that Fremont has done to improve itself and the lives of all of its citizens. We're doing a lot of work with the city on the school district side. The city received a grant from CAL FIRE for urban forestry, and we've been planting trees. In October, we planted nearly 100 trees at Azevedo Elementary. This month, we're going to plant over 130 trees at Matos.
Great.
And, these investments are important. They give a sense of local empowerment. It's people working together. It's not just an individual having to carry the whole burden of the environment. And it brings it back to the local really neighborhood sense. There's a lot of terrible news around the world, a lot of terrible news, across the nation. And I think it's easy to kind of get sucked into a fear that everything is terrible or impossible. But working together with people in your own neighborhood, in your own community, you really can make a difference that's visible and that you can feel. And I think, in 5 years, we're going to start to see and feel even more rewards from the investments we've already made.
So Nate, I could probably listen to Nate forever. I again was fortunate to work with him, and I just want to thank you again for helping us see that environmental literacy. It's not just for the classroom; it's for boardrooms, offices, every space where decisions are made. Your work does remind us that sustainability is about not only learning, but about leadership and legacy. And let me just emphasize this: leaving the world a better place for the next generation. That's why I appreciate that you brought in student voice. And then to our listeners, whether you're an educator, a business leader, a community partner, we all have a role. Please let this resonate in you. We all have a role to play in creating cultures that value both people and the planet. So again, Nate, thank you so much for coming on today and giving your time to help us understand more.
Great. Linda, thank you so much for the opportunity. And thank you for organizing this podcast series.
Sure. And so, listeners, if today's conversation does spark an idea, share this episode with someone in your network. And don't forget to follow, rate, and review Moving Forward, conversations on culture, identity, healing, and hope on your favorite platform. Together, we can build a future rooted in purpose, partnership, and possibility. Thank you, everyone.